Of all the mysteries I'm likely to cover, the topic of UFOs is without a doubt one of the most controversial. Just mention the word UFO at a cocktail party and see how fast the other guests avoid you like the plague. Even worse is for a respected professional, or heaven forbid a pilot or scientist, to admit that he or she saw one, and their careers are likely to take a sudden tailspin as quick as showing up for work wearing a tinfoil hat. What's even worse is that many highly respected people, including police officers, military officers, astronauts, and at least 2 U.S. presidents, have publicly acknowledged that they've seen something strange in the sky, and one wonders why all the fuss. Why indeed? While true believers point out the fact that modern-day sightings began shortly after we dropped 2 atomic bombs, historical reports of strange sky ships have been documented since antiquity. Therefore, I believe the best way to tackle this subject is to start by going back in time, not to document a UFO incident, but to point out other taboo subjects that got some rather well-known personalities into hot water. Way back in 1633, Galileo Galilei was placed under house arrest by the Inquisition. His transgression? The heresy of insisting that the Earth was not the center of the universe. Church orthodoxy at the time held that the Earth was the immovable center of the universe around which everything else revolved. This was despite the fact that other scientists such as Copernicus had known for centuries that this was not the case. In addition to being denounced, the book in which his heretical declarations were published was banned, and Galileo spent the rest of his life locked up. As bad as it was for one of the world's most gifted scientists of all time to be treated in so cavalier a manner for espousing a belief that would ultimately prove to be correct, his tribulations were hardly an isolated incident. Here are a few more recent examples. Alfred Wegener postulated the theory of plate tectonics and publicly advocated continental drift in 1912. The vast majority of geologists of his era not only ridiculed the idea, they promptly organized a symposium specifically designed to poke holes in the theory. Other notable scientists who were ridiculed for their beliefs include George Swag, who postulated the existence of subatomic particles called quarks and would later win the Nobel Prize for this discovery. Not to mention Albert Einstein, whose theory of relativity was initially called into question because it didn't allow for a static universe, which was a universally accepted concept at the time. To correct this error, Einstein came up with what he deemed the cosmological constant to fix the problem, only to later admit this was his greatest blunder. The reason I point this out is to set the stage for the next piece in the UFO puzzle. Are we alone? Since the mid-1950s, when UFO sightings from both civilian and military personnel exploded, there have been many highly respected individuals who realized there was a high probability that the Earth was indeed being visited by beings from other worlds. Bear in mind, at the time, there was nothing man-made capable of orbiting the Earth, much less traveling to another planet. Even though a number of well-documented UFO incidents involving both radar confirmation and fighter plane chases occurred both in the U.S. and abroad, neither the military nor the political powers that be were willing to admit that the airspace over all their heads was routinely being breached. Far from a lack of empirical evidence, there was literally an embarrassment of riches in the 40s and 50s that the Air Force was forced to come to grips with. As early as 1943, 5-star General Hap Arnold was tasked with investigating pilot reports of either luminous or silvery disks that occasionally shadowed bombers heading to or from targets over war-torn Germany. The pilots back then called them Foo Fighters, which they dutifully logged in their after-action reports. At the time, the U.S. military thought Foo Fighters were a German secret weapon. It was only after the war that it came to be realized that German pilots who'd encountered them thought they belonged to us. After the end of World War II, the reports of anomalous aerial phenomenon didn't abate. In fact, they increased dramatically. Initially, the military didn't take the sightings all that seriously, but this attitude changed in the summer of 1947 when an onslaught of reports by both civilian and military pilots, radar operators, and military personnel reached a fever pitch. This was the same year that the world-famous Roswell incident occurred. While the military first admitted and then later recanted the fact that debris had been recovered from a crashed flying disc, the cat was out of the bag, if only briefly. So much so that even the FBI began to take an active interest in the reported phenomenon. You heard me right. UFOs had caught the attention of J. Edgar Hoover himself. On January 15, 1947, J. Edgar sent a memo to Clyde Tolson, the number 2 man in the Bureau, that read as follows. I would do it, that is, study the UFOs, but before agreeing to it, we must insist upon full access to the discs recovered. For instance, in the LA case, the Army grabbed it and wouldn't let us have it for cursory examination. 2.5 years later, the Bureau was still in the thick of the chase. Here's a transcript of a memo to Hoover from the Washington FBI office dated March 22, 1950, that was released in 1976 under the Freedom of Information Act. An investigator for the Air Force stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape, with raised centers and about 50 feet in diameter. Each was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape but only 3 feet tall, who were dressed in metallic cloth of very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. LA case? Recovered flying saucers? With alien bodies? The plot thickens.